Véranchon speaking. I'm coming at you from. Give me a second here. Okay. Back from vacation. So, this is awesome. I had a great week, a great vacation. Maybe you notice I have a new microphone. People have been asking for it. I'm sorry about that. It's so a little bit isolated here. Getting to the pharmacy is usually a little bit of an issue to get floss and things like that. So I was able to finally get to a store where I could choose the microphone I wanted. I believe it's a higher quality. It all works out really well. I hope the recording goes on well as too. So I'm really excited about that. What I'm really excited about, like even more than just the new microphone, of course, is this new little discovery. People send me stuff all the time, as you know, and sometimes it's like, it's not so good. Sometimes it's actually kind of interesting. And a lot of people send me information about new energy sources, claiming zero energy or new energy forms and things like that. And most of the time, it's a lot of bogus frauds and things like that. I mean, I did a whole series on the Keshi technologies because I thought it had some value to look into it. And it was some interesting measurements. It seemed to have kind of died internationally among all the people that were doing devices and things. So, and I spoke to my partners over the week since I saw him. Well, two of them over the week while I was on vacation, still no news. I mean, everybody's calling everybody, trying to get their money back and things like that. So it doesn't look very good. But on my university email, after I came back, I kind of checked since I don't really teach there so much anymore. I got a message from someone that says, "Hey, you should check out Brilliant Light Power Incorporated and what they're trying to do." It's like, okay, so I did this. I spent a few hours this Saturday morning actually looking through that. And I got to say, this is impressive. This is pretty cool stuff. This is a well-established company with very well-established investors in the U.S. And they've been the researcher behind it has been experimenting since the early 90s. So it's into something pretty different. Of course, critically, being criticized a lot because he's taking a new spin on things, which is a reality of brand new, paradigm shifts in energy generation or anything fundamental like energy, for example. And presentations, demonstrations, like real tangible data from third-party sources, multiple sources of information, graphs, things I can sink my teeth into. And the results are very promising. They want to commercialize stuff next year, so they're not quite ready, but they're getting ready, resolving some engineering issues to get it done. Essentially, what they've produced essentially is a way to source atomic energy, respecting the laws of thermodynamics of all things, which is awesome. But essentially generating a new form of energy that can be captured and converted into electricity. Now, I have to give you guys a little bit of a scientific background so you can understand. And of course, they're not kind of just reorganizing matter. They're actually monopolizing on what the research Dr. Mills, which is at the center of all this, what he thinks he's discovered like a different state. I guess you could call it it's not really a state of matter. It's a different state of the hydrogen atom. So a different state of the atom. Atomic organization. Like from your science classes, you may remember that the hydrogen atom has a nucleus, usually a proton. Sometimes, in the case of deuterium and things like that, there's or tritium, there's one or two neutrons also in the nucleus. We don't really know what those are per se, but it adds weight to the hydrogen atoms and things like that. And there's always, since there's only a positive charge in the middle given by one proton, there's always a single negative charge electron rotating around it to keep the atom stable and non-reactive. So the electron is kind of spinning in a spherical movement around the proton, one positive charge equal and one negative charge, and they're canceling each other out. So there's like a little like a magnet. It's rotating, and at its restive state, when it's not excited by other outside energies or anything like that, the hydrogen atom is very calm and kind of spins at a certain. The electron spins at a certain distance from the nucleus, which is called the ground state. And in chemistry and physics, all matter, if it's at its ground state, it's stable. It doesn't do anything. It's not trying to react and do anything special. That's its most comfortable, lowest energy state. And then if you make it react, then it goes in, sometimes the electrons go into a higher state of excitation, goes like farther out from the proton for a little bit. Then when it comes back near to its ground state level, it emits a wavelength, which is a form of energy in a way. And sometimes the wavelength is within the visible spectrum, and you get things like gas lights. If you take certain metals, for example, and you've done this at school, like ninth grade chemistry, you take a metal like copper, you put it like in powder form, for instance, and you put it underneath, inside the fire of a Bunsen burner. It's going to change it. It's going to change the color of the flame. I forget what color it would be. Maybe it's green. Anyhow, and that's because the fire puts some energy into the electrons of the copper atom. The electrons go a little bit they go a bit wide. They absorb the energy. They go a little bit wider, a wider orbit, higher speed, and then it kind of flashes back down. And that difference of orbit, in theory, theoretical distance of orbit, generates that wavelengths that you see, and it's in the nanometers of the green light. Because I didn't really research for copper, but there's a light, so you see green, right? Those are general principles. Now, what Dr. Mills of Brilliant Light Power, what he did is that he figured out a way to catalyze hydrogen atoms into a lower ground state. So instead of like this non-reactive state, it's like he figured out a way to, using some catalysts, which are non-consumed reactants to a chemical reaction. So instead of the electrons being in a spherical, like maybe around the proton of the hydrogen atom about this distance, the electrons kind of fade in, bunch in at a much closer distance to the nucleus, and find a different state that is more stable than the previous ground state. And by doing this movement, it releases wavelengths in a lot of it in a very low nanometer, so very short wavelengths in ultraviolet and super ultraviolet spectrum, so not visible, right? That's like 99% of it from what the device he's using. 99% of it is non-visible, and it's ultraviolet or super ultraviolet and high energy. These are, when it's low wavelengths, it's really higher energy, so lots of energy, like wavelengths you can't see, and the atom basically just sits there in this new state because it's more stable than its previous ground state that we thought was the lowest state that hydrogen could be. And now, so he's found a way to get those hydrogen atoms taken from water, in this case. So the catalyst kind of separates the water and oxygen, and then the hydrogen atoms orbital distance of the electrons goes to this lower state, stable state, and it emits a bunch of energy. Now, this energy is basically emits, it's a wavelength, so it's similar to light, just waves. And there are photovoltaic panels that can, in fact, react and convert that wavelength of those small size into electricity. Right? We've talked about this before. That's how PV cells work. They, depending on the materials that the cells are made out of, it's going to absorb a certain wavelength, and then it converts it to electricity. Now, what's really interesting is like you're not you're defying one law of chemistry, which is, once you get to the ground state, it can't be more stable, and you can't go lower than that. We're breaking that. Like he's saying, like he's found a way to break that rule, and releasing a whole bunch of other energy without doing fusion or fission at all with the atom. It's just like the electron gets a little bit closer, and then you're converting that the emitted wavelengths, which is mostly UV or shorter waves, into electricity. And through testing, like using valid like a calorimeter and using different testing methods to see all the intensity and the wavelengths of the waves that are coming out of this reaction, is being able to show that there's a lot of energy coming out of that. So much so that, because some of the mechanisms, like you need to ignite, you actually need to kind of fire it to get it started, to get the reactant started with the catalyst, which is very typical. So you do that. There's a little bit of energy that's needed for that. There's a couple of like pumps, little things like that that require some electricity, like some input of electricity, right, into the system. And when you do you're able to convert the hydrogen into this lower orbital. What comes out as an output is 200 times bigger than what you put in for the injectors and the different devices that actually produces it. So you're creating what he calls hydrinos, which is hydrogen atoms with the lower ground state from water. No other byproducts come out of it. And he's been spending a certain number of the last few years trying to file patents, the appropriate patents, and figure out the engineering necessary to kind of contain that power. And in general, what he's done as far as a mechanism, just to summarize it, because you can look at the website there, all the links are below, and like he's creating this pump of water essentially, and the catalyst, and that ignites that converts the hydrogen of the water into this lower state. It generates all this radiation inside this ball. Then around the ball, you have the photovoltaic, layered photovoltaic cells that will convert the electricity. So you're able to maximize the capture of this radiation in the creation of the hydrinos, I keep forgetting, into usable electricity. And the hydrinos, I don't know what he does with the hydrinos, but he says that they're not a big problem for the environment and whatnot. That still remains to be seen. In my view, there's a couple of elements that are missing from the explanations from the science, and I'll be doing more exploration, don't worry about it, to figure those out. And one of them is, well, the process is, he's generating electricity. That's definitely, that seems, unless he's completely falsifying the results, and he's done live demos. I was witness of one by video with like a bunch of engineers, I think, in the room, who were also asking questions. He's inputting some electricity, and he's producing 120, 200 times the input electricity. That seems to be valid unless, of course, falsifying records, right? And experiments and not giving the right numbers. So let's assume, he's not lying with the numbers, and his team is not lying, like doing live demos. So the electricity is being produced. So assuming that, right? So the doubt number one is it really because you're creating this different state of hydrogen, or is it because of some other reason? And he's in the presentation, in the videos, if you explore a little bit, the videos that he's posted, and I am posting a YouTube video on it down below that it's about 2 hours and a half, but it's significant information. He does show that there's a high possibility, like based on other observations of the world, what's being created is similar to some other stuff we've observed, but we can't really describe that well. So it kind of fits a little bit, but it's not really strong yet. The what it is. We can show the power is being generated, but he's postulating that the hydrinos exist, and that's perfectly fine scientifically, because you have to, at those scales, atomic scales or lower, you have to base yourself on observations and measurements, and you can postulate that, well, since emissions of this wavelengths from this sort of some observation in the cosmos has the same properties that what I'm generating in my ball, then it potentially is the same thing, even though we don't really know for sure exactly what it is and how it works and things like that. That's fine. Eventually, science kind of catches up, and we discover more and more and more, and then we can define certain things. So that's fine, even though it is a question mark. And it's a pretty big question mark, because the second issue is that the scientific community are like, he's been around long enough that the scientific community has been criticizing his papers, his books, and the publications and the demos he's been providing, by saying, well, number one, the lower state of energy doesn't exist. I already mentioned that, and 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 essentially it's like you're breaking like known science, and there's other equations that don't fit what you're saying that are very well valid and established. Um, and there's no mention of what those are right away, but because it's pretty in-depth physics that I'm not in connection to. So a lot of the of eminent scientists are reacting by essentially saying, well, you're breaking stuff that we rely on as far as equations, even though a lot of it fits, some it doesn't. As an engineer, personally, I don't mind that. I care about results, and if you're generating electricity and the input and output are safe, obviously there's something there that is usable, that can be practically used and commercialized even, and this is what they're moving towards, commercialization. And even though it kind of breaks some rules, I mean, the results as far as electricity generation, I mean, it's undeniable. So as an engineer, I don't really care if I completely understand the process, whether hydrinos are produced or is something different. Is it a little bit of fusion? I mean, I don't really care. Is it safe? Does it work? Yes. Okay. Let's do more experiments as we move along to figure that out. But let's move forward and use this new process that seems to be pretty safe, and put it into some application carefully. So no, that's my opinion. It's always been my opinion. So the detractors, I'm going to keep listening to them. But as long as the data shows production of electricity and it's safe, I'm happy. And I know you would be, because you are revolutionaries. And science needs sometimes a good kick in the nuts to keep moving. So you can't stay on your old paradigms and old equations. Things need to move along, needs to evolve and improve and continue on, right? You can't just sit on Newton's equations and that was like, I don't know, it's 1600s or 1700s. I don't even know when Newton was alive. I would have to research that. But you can't sit on those equations and say, well, these are good forever. We've shown that Newton's equations are incomplete. They work at low speeds, but then we add other parts to it, and then we kind of add to it, and we create a new theorems, and we make it fit the previous observable equations by adapting them, and make sure the new information fits the grand scheme. It's very, very standard, and it's very normal that even eminent scientists react with disbelief without a concrete application event where they can see, well, okay, definitely there's something here. Let's look into it. Let's invest some money and get into it. Now, this group, this company itself, just some more information on this. I mean, they've been around for a while. They've received over $60 million in investment, high risk investment, mind you, because it's all research and getting data. There's no application until they actually push out something, which they expect in the first quarter of or the first half of 2017. So I'm hoping for that. The ideology is that this device is small enough that you can, and this is what they want to do. They want to put one in every home, because instead of a centralized system, it's not a big machine or a big building. It's here's the data here. Essentially, it would fit within 1 cubic meter of space in the house, self-contained, soundproofed, because it does make some noise, but it's soundproof. It's a closed system, unlike a motor, like a generator. It doesn't need air from the outside, and stuff like that. It doesn't need to be exposed like an open system. So it's a closed system. It works. Once it's initiated and you kind of keep it going using water as a fuel, so water is plentiful. You're good for about 15 years. And what you need to change, the first thing you need to change is you need to change the photovoltaic cells because they get damaged over time as a natural course of things. Just like any PV cell, and you need to change those. And there are no moving parts except for a magnetic pump, which is, maintenance on that is minimal. And generating like 10 kilowatts of energy of electricity very, very easily. It's essentially the generating power uh, off of the cells is 4.6 mega million watts. Sorry, so this is 4.6 megawatts per square meter of photovoltaic square meter of dark, geez, dark emitter. Because and they call that because the radiation kind of comes out and it's not visible, so it's actually dark, even though it emits lots of radiation, like in wavelengths. Anyway, so it's significant. Like you're talking about like a square meter of the reactions of the surface area of the of what's being heated up and then creating hydrinos generates 4.6 gigawatts. Sorry, megawatts, not giga, megawatts of electricity. I mean, that's huge, right? So the device is really small and very easily contained. They can easily get these things manufactured. And if one is defective in your home, you can get it replaced entirely. And the cost for a device would be like the capital cost for them to make a device is about $600 for a home. This would be like for a 10 kilowatt unit, for example. And they would probably, they don't want to sell the devices, they want to kind of rent them out. So it would cost you a certain number of dollars per kilowatt that is pumped out. But I mean, you'd figure with a decent markup, it could be $1,500 expenditures spread over like a 15-year period before you have to change it. So you're amortizing your personal costs of the generation of energy for your home over a long period of time. It's not a lump cost of $1,500 on day one. They rent out the device essentially, just like you're renting out your cable modem box or whatever else you use for your TV, even though people don't use TV anymore, and you just pay out monthlies over like years and years and years, and you got juice and you got maintenance costs kind of included, packaged in if you got a problem with it. And you get that you can have redundant systems. You can have two. If one fails, you still have juice with a second one. You know, that kind of deal. That's all possible. It's a self-sustained system with a little pump of water, minimal water usage in there, and the extra electricity that comes out of the system it can be fed back in the self-contained environment to feed the little pumps and the little things that are needed for the device to keep functioning over X amount of years. So it's really cool. I mean, I'm excited about it. I'm excited to explore it further. I will, of course, be very, very skeptical as far as the testing and the commercialization. I want to see a fully working device. They're still working out some kinks. Like it's getting so there's so much radiation that needs to be sent out that it melts things like tungsten and that have a boiling point of it vaporizes silver and tungsten. And these have a melting point of like 2500, 2700 Kelvin, which is like 3800 Fahrenheit if you're American, something crazy like that, or like 2200 Celsius if you use Celsius. So they're still figuring out some bits. Definitely they figured out it needs cooling. You need to dump the extra heat because it needs to stay at a temperature that won't melt the whole thing. So it's not there yet to put in your home, but it's getting there in a serious way from what I've seen. So I'll keep my eyes open on that. This is serious energy generation that's new. The science is solid aside from what I mentioned, which is like a brand new way to see the hydrogen atom. We'll see if that is true or not, but basically what we want to see, we want to see the result. We want to keep seeing energy generation, like energy in, energy out. You're getting more out of it, and you're getting a new form of stable atom that is that is environmentally friendly, doesn't do a whole lot. And I do have a concern about that, actually, before I forget. If you're generating these hydrinos, even though it's a small quantity, it is a new form of atom that is not natural, at least not on Earth. It may be, according to him, it may be the dark matter we hear about. That could be it. Like in the universe, there may be large clouds of hydrogen that are hydrinos. Because of the way they emit light, it's the same as what they've measured here when they create the hydrinos here. So hydrinos could be dark matter in the universe, but it's not available here. It's not present on a planet Earth. And what happens if it generates a lot of electricity, a lot of radiation, that high energy UV, if the electrons goes into the hydrino state, right, stable, you would have to insert a lot of energy to actually bring it back to its standard ground state from before. And I'm a little bit concerned, like if the hydrinos, we start producing the hydrinos that are very stable, how would those react with other compounds? Because it's not the same as a standard hydrogen atom. Will it, like in theory, if you want to bring it back to its original state, it's going to consume a lot of energy to bring it back to its original ground state. So you get into situations where it could either be useful to do things like extinguish fires, like to absorb energy. You use it, like put it in a high energy situation with a good environment, and maybe it's going to get back into its original ground state. So it could be useful, or it could be like in combination with different things, like in the atmosphere, it could like react in whatever ways that we can't really anticipate the whole lot. I don't see like immediate problems because it's going to capture energy that's already in the air. But what it could do, like inherently, it could cool off a lot of stuff really quickly if it's high density, and it can catalyze or trigger in localized areas, like converting your home into like an instant freeze zone, because that's a lot of energy intake. So, but this is really new. So I mean, I didn't hear Mr. Mills talk about that. Like, does he dispose of it? Is there a way to safely disable or disarm the hydrinos naturally, so that they become the natural state that we know and we understand their properties? Has he figured out different ways to deal with those, or to use the hydrinos as a byproduct, perhaps, that can be resellable and used in different ways? I don't know. I still have to explore that, but that is one of the concerns I do have on it. Assuming that's actually what is produced. But evidently, if you follow the laws of thermodynamics, you are producing something that potentially can absorb lots of energy, and it's something new, so we don't know its properties that well. So, something to think about. All right, so that's going to be it for today. So, those of you who are excited about free energy, environmentally friendly, basically free energy, almost. Like, it's not free because it's commercial, but, something pretty decent. This is the strongest candidate I've seen so far, and it's super potential, assuming there's no lies on the technical results I've observed so far. So, I'm keeping an eye on this. I will report back when I have more. In the meantime, feel free to explore the links down below. Feel free to explore a whole bunch of stuff. Feed me with more information on this stuff. If people know more, I'd love to hear about it. And I will most likely contact this company directly and get more information for myself directly. Hopefully, I'll get some personal attention, especially focus around a project that requires a lot of energy that I'm working on, like in the megawatts. Very likely they'll be listening to me and my partners on that, and I will of course share with you guys what I discover along the way on this, because this is, if this is it, if this is real, I mean this is good, and it looks really really good to me, and that's obviously pretty powerful for me. If I already after just a few hours of exploration, I have that level of confidence in what I've seen so far. So that's gonna be it for now. I wish you a great day and great science and a revolution coming. I'll see you next time.